Welcome back again. I am Dr. Daniel Handysides, although most of you know me as Danny. It's my privilege, again, to talk to one of my friends. Today we have Nelita Davamony-Crawford, and we'll jump right in. Nelita, who are you and how do you know me?
Who am I? Okay, let's just go through all my different labels. I'm a pre-K through 8 principal. I live in Oregon. I have 3 children, and for the purposes of this conversation, it's important to note that I have 3 mixed race children, and my husband is pretty white.
He's pretty white.
There you go. He's pretty white. And I'm obsessed with perfecting a bagel recipe right now. So we've been obsessively having bagels in our house. My children will tell me which ones I don't like because that's what children will do. They'll tell you what they don't like. I also have been for several years now an ABAR educator, an anti-bias, anti-racist educator that firmly believes in decolonizing the classroom, decolonizing discipline and classroom management, and the manner in which we share power in the classroom. So that has been a passion of mine and a burden of mine for several years now. And what else? What else do I do? That's all I got for you. We might unpack some more with that. I'm also a proud Sri Lankan woman who immigrated to the United States when I was 5 years old, and my parents and they're going to listen to this and they'll be like, oh, she sold us out. And yes, I did, decided that they would keep Sinhalese as their secret language so that they could talk behind our backs about, whatever plans they needed. So they never actually taught us the mother tongue. So I am a proud Sri Lankan. I'm like this, and a lot of my immigrant friends can relate to this. You recognize when you hear the language, you can understand a lot of it, but you're painfully stuck when it comes to producing the words required to participate in your culture.
I would expect nothing less than Amma and Appa to do that. They are wonderfully sneaky people, and I love them so much. This is a hugely broad question, but what's your personal experience with racism?
Okay, wait, before we get to that,
Sure.
I didn't answer, how do I know you?
Oh yeah, tell me how you know me.
We forgot that part. Okay, so I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that there was some connection between your wife and my sister and Taylor, her husband, and then somehow Pete was all up in that mix. There was like some Loma Linda friend group things going on there. I was not directly acquainted with you, but through this family connection, we got to hang out a few times.
Absolutely.
And, and all the people that know you can attest to this. The irreverent, intelligent Danny.
Oh, okay.
But you got to put the irreverent in there.
The irreverence there. Anyone who knows me, they know that's true. And anybody who knows the Davamonys realizes that I don't think your mom has ever met a stranger. Like, it's literally like, are you hungry? Come, I've got food. Like, come into our home. Like, we met today. Like, let's spend the afternoon together. And so it was a very quick, I do think your sister was central. I think Sandra and that whole group came together, and Pete and Taylor and Nil, they were all together.
But I have appreciated the friendship for many reasons, but the irreverence.
You got to be irreverent.
Yes. Carry on.
Carry on. And again, for those who are watching this, share them. They're fun conversations. They're not serious, but the topic is serious. And so I want voices to be heard. So your personal experience, that's a huge topic, but with racism.
So it's interesting because I kind of hate this question, and I also recognize the gravity and importance of this question. I hate this question because we have to acknowledge that racism is trauma. And so when we're talking about this, and we're talking about like me sharing the experiences that I've had, it is relaying trauma. I'm at the place in my life where I feel like I've done enough work where I can where I can share that and I can give that to the universe, and I'm not bothered by who believes it or doesn't believe it. Being a bar educator, I recognize that there's different realms of racism. So there's internalized racism, the messages around me that I have taken on and dismissed myself and kind of integrated into me that have taken a while to unlearn. There's interpersonal racism, where people have been rude or dismissive in regards to, and specifically in regards to, my race or the color of my skin, or, you know, something else. And then there's systemic and institutional racism. It took me a really, really, really long time to acknowledge racism outside of a textbook or a historical thing that happened in the past, and to recognize that it was happening in real time to me. I think there was a lot of things that I just kind of, I guess I'm just too sensitive, or I'm the one that creates this, or I'm the one that creates drama. And I took a lot of that on. And in this weird way, the more I started learning about race, the more I felt empowered and less bothered by what people thought. And so there's two things I'll share. One of them is kind of shows someone else's ignorance more than mine, and one of them is painful. I was at university right after when 9/11 happened, and I don't know if you can like tap into that, Danny, and where you were and what it felt like to experience 9/11. But there was this like intense uncertainty about like, wait, is this going to stop? Are there going to be more planes? What is this going to lead to? And there was that kind of like really destabilizing kind of feeling for a while. I remember, I wish I could remember who it was, not to throw him under the bus, or maybe, I don't know, maybe I want to, but there was this situation a few weeks after that happened where this guy, a friend or someone that I, had a good rapport with, said something to me jokingly in the cafeteria line about like, aren't you embarrassed? Like, people from your country did this? And I was like, I want to be like, you idiot. Look at a map, first of all. Like, I'm from Sri Lanka, but that wasn't even the point. The point is, my kinfolk, the people that I probably have more of an identity connection to is who you're talking about. But also the fact that you felt so comfortable to suggest that I should be embarrassed about something that a group of people who wished harm, and who also brought harm to people in their own racial group, because there were all kinds of people in those buildings, that I should have to speak for that in some way. That was kind of one of those, it spoke more of their ignorance than it did of my ignorance. But I just remember being really like kind of bristling, and this place, this community that I had never felt othered in, immediately felt like that. But I didn't know it for a really long time. It took me years after I left, and then we moved back and lived there for 12 years, but it took me years to realize some of those like little tiny things that happened frequently that were like exhausting. Like I feel like I would come back from work or from going to the grocery store and would feel like I had to take a nap. And it was really, really hard to explain that to like David, who's white, who doesn't have experiences like that. And to explain those to him. And then also for him to be like, really? Like, that happened? And then when he started seeing those things happening, it was like, whoa, that happens. And when you think of being married, that's why proximity is like only a little part of it. You can be married to someone that's Black, Indigenous, a person of color, and you can still be racist. And not in like a, I hate you and cut you down kind of way, but in a, I don't know how your story impacts you kind of way. And I think that's a big part of racism. It's not about good or bad. It's about what I'm swimming in every day. So that was something that was just kind of an ignorant thing. A story that I have only started sharing recently, that I have wrestled with for a few years now, is the loss of our oldest child. I was, it took us a while to get pregnant. And so when we did, I was really like hyper, like journaling everything and writing everything down. And I was really like, I want to keep track of everything. I want to do this right. I want to eat the right food. I want to make sure, like, I was really, really like particular about everything. Well, beginning of my third trimester, something felt off to me and I couldn't really articulate it, but I knew something wasn't right. And I was trying to like figure it out. I'm very much into lists and writing things down. So I'm like, okay, what feels different? Like, okay, I started feeling like all these kicks. So I'm looking in the books and they're talking about kick counts. I'm like, oh, let me do kick counts. So I'm doing this and I'm like, okay, I don't think I'm having as many kick counts as I'm supposed to be. And then I'm, looking through the list, what else? And then I'm like, and this is something that my melanated sisters will understand. My skin color changed. Now that happens, like I got winter makeup and I have summer makeup because my skin changes and I need winter makeup and summer makeup. But this was like very short, intensely. And it wasn't just like my skin changed. It was like the pallor of my skin changed. And it was something that was so distinct that I was like, that's weird. Like something's off. And so there was all these things that I noted and I was like, well, I'm going to call. So I call and I did not get my doctor. I got the doctor on a call and I said, hey, I go through this list and I said, my skin color changed. And she's like, that's not a thing. That's not a thing. And so I was like, okay, she's the doctor. She knows. What do I know? What do I know about this experience? I've never experienced pregnancy before. And then I was like, well, I'm reading this book and it says I should be concerned about this. And she was like, well, those books get people really riled up and hormones can do funny things. I called 3 other times after that. And finally she's like, well, maybe you should just go in and get, your stress test or whatever. And they did that. The baby's heartbeat was normal. And they said, hey, do you feel kicking? And I'm like, I don't. Which at that point, that should have raised some alarms about amniotic fluid and so on and so forth. But how that played out was I ended up in my third trimester having a stillbirth after probably 2 and 3 weeks of knowing something was wrong and communicating consistently and regularly with the office. The thing that stuck with me about that whole experience is years later, I actually socially at like some random event met a Black female OB. And we somehow came around to this. And we were talking about it, and I told her about the list of things. And I told her about the skin color situation. She goes, oh yeah, of course. That would immediately be, oh, maybe there's something with hormones. And she didn't say, oh, that always means this, but she was like, that is a sign to not ignore. And I came home from that interaction and I wept because for years, I felt like it was my fault that I didn't fight hard enough, that I didn't push hard enough, that I had known for weeks that something was wrong and I didn't fight for my kid. And as a result of it, I lost my child. But now when I look at it and I think about it, I was like, no, the system failed me. The system failed me. The doctor who didn't see brown skin. And now I can look back and I can feel grace and forgiveness for her because she's a product of her environment. She's a product of her training. And so when we think of that, that expands the conversation to, oh, you did this to me, to how do we correct the knowledge that our doctors who are treating patients of color, how do we correct their educational experience so that they're available to receive all of this is data for you to make better decisions on treating me? And we're 10 years out from that experience now, and I can have a conversation like that. But now when I go see a physician, I have a completely different conversation. Before I will commit to a conversation, I have a literal set of questions that I ask, which seems probably really extreme to some physicians. And I've had physicians kind of bristle, and I'm like, yeah, you're not going to be my physician. Because this is, okay, you are educated, you've gone to medical school, you have all these things to bring to the table, but I've lived in this skin and I have a doctorate in my body. So together we can come up with better outcomes for my well-being. But if we're just going to use your medical knowledge in this space, that's not going to fly. So when I go to a doctor now, I say, how much research have you done on working with women of color? How much research have you done on how women who experience pain are dismissed in doctor-patient relationship? I go through this whole thing, and there's like 2 or 3 doctors that have been like, and the last doctor I saw in this new town that I moved to, she was on it. And I was like, yes, woke white woman, you can be my doctor. Because she wasn't bothered or offended that I was honoring my personhood and myself by saying that. But all of those experiences are experiences with race and experiences with racism. And now as a result of that, I interact with these situations differently in a way that maybe some people are like, oh, that's a little intense to be like that with your doctor, maybe, but it's been life or death for me. So that's how I'm going to roll.
And I think the challenge is it's life or death for so many people of color.
Yeah.
It's not even, and so as you're talking, I'm ruminating on some of the things that you're saying, and even the flippant way that I asked the question, I had never even thought of the trauma of personal experience of racism. I've known that racism is horrible. I know that it sucks. I know that many of my friends of color, tell me how horrible it is, but I hadn't, that's a traumatic question. And I just ask it. I'm just like, what's your experience with it? And until you said, it's taking me time to get there. I was sitting there, I was like, man, it's true. This isn't a conversation that we have. And then I go back to, my cisgendered Christian white male world and go, wasn't that fun to talk to Nelita? This is something that you can't throw off. And that it doesn't end, and it continues every day.
But I think that's why these conversations are also so important, because I'm saying that this is trauma and so many people experience this trauma, and your privilege is shouldering some of that burden and taking some of that pain and acknowledging that trauma exists, which then shifts something. We hope, right? We hope these conversations shift something in someone's brain that they can relate to. Maybe they can't relate to the fact that my skin is brown because theirs isn't, but right. Maybe they can relate to the fact that they've lost a child, or they're a mother, or they can, maybe they can feel that. And when they feel that, they can extend some form of empathy to the systemic issues that happen. And I think that's why these conversations matter. And I think that's why it's important when you're ready to be able to talk about racism that you've experienced. But it's true. I agree with you. I don't think it's not something that we should expect all of the people in our life to be able to do, which is why when they say, don't place the emotional burden on Black women and Black men to explain to you why Black lives should matter. Hey, one Black friend that I have, tell me why this is a thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
But there are people who have positioned themselves. I'm an AR educator. I've positioned myself to be able to be patient, that conversation, to work with, have that conversation, and
right.
That's different.
Some of the friends I reached out to said, I'm tired. I don't want to talk to you right now about this. And I respect that. I respect that decision to say. And I guess my goal with this is, it's not to end racism. It's to, that's too much white privilege and white male privilege to think that I can solve something that's 200 years old. I don't need to be a savior as an ally. I need to, listen. But if there was one thing that you could see change, if there was one thing in the short term or in the long term that you could see change, what would it be?
So the things that I would see change are the things that I think educational spaces need to change, and I think medical spaces need to change. And those are spaces that I interact with daily, so I can see the ways, the minor ways and the significant ways in which they can change. I think a big part of that is, I don't think you can even address racism until you have some awareness of your identity and some social emotional language and done some social emotional learning. So that's what we do in the classroom. That's what we do with the pre-K kids. That's what we do with the kindergarten. Go on there and like, hey, let's talk about all this horrible stuff that happened. We talk about, what does it look like to, what does kindness look like? What does it look like when you're kind to your friend? What does it look like when your friend hurts you? What does it look like when your friend hurts you, when you want them to know that it hurts you? I think we have to recognize that we can't talk about trauma-informed environments. We can't talk about social emotional learning if we're not willing to talk about racial trauma. We're not willing to talk about microaggressions that children face every day, that they, and I know this as a child who has gone through an educational system. There's all these little things that have happened that have packed on, and I think in 7th and 8th grade that I had 2 Black women that were teachers who, one of them I still keep in touch with. These women being in those positions in the classroom and leading a group of students in this way transformed the idea of what had been normalized in a classroom experience for me. So, one of the reasons I'm a principal is because less than 5% of principals in the United States are of Asian descent. And I will tell you, coming from a family, not my parents per se, but from a larger family where everyone's like, go be a doctor, go be a doctor, go be a doctor. I am purposefully an educator because I know my representation in this space is super, super important. I had a little Latinx girl come up to me. She was like in 2nd grade. Must have been last year. And she goes, Mrs. Crawford, I didn't know brown ladies could be teachers. And, we were living in a pretty homogenous community. And it was this double-edged sword where I was like, break my heart. And also like, I changed something in her head that allowed her to think differently about what she could do. And I didn't need to do that by having a history lesson on racism, which is also important.
It is.
But there's little ways that we can do this. And there's little ways in which, when people talk to your kids about race, we're not like, tell them about the entire Atlantic slave trade when they are, age appropriate. I get it. Sure. Yeah. But in our house, we don't get to avoid the conversation about race. Mommy's brown, daddy's white. Guess what? We teach children classification all the time. They learn shapes, they learn colors, they learn numbers. And now you want to be like, oh, we don't see race? Kids will call your nonsense. You have taught them to classify everything, animals and shapes and numbers. That you don't want them to classify people? No, it's okay to classify people and recognize that we're different. It's not okay for those differences to affect how we treat people. So I think it's really, really important for our educational spaces, for our spaces where we're responsible for child rearing, whether as a parent or as a grandparent, to...
Your camera shut off. Oh, it's no worries.
Okay. Got a call there. Okay.
Oh, did you? We're more important than her call. Hopefully it wasn't David.
Well, I think it might be, but I'll just keep talking and we'll walk. You walk with me.
Let me ask you another question. Because you make the point that we do classify things. And there are different worlds. I wish we could say we all lived in the same world, but there is a white world and there's a Sri Lankan world. And there's, if we want to get picky, there's different Sri Lankan worlds. You can break it into Tamil and non-Tamil and, you get into it. But if there was one thing that you wish your white friends understood about your world, what would it be?
I think a big part of what I would love for my white friends to understand is two things. I think that a lot of times when I have been open about something, I think there's a little bit of like a believability hitch. And depending on how close this friendship is, that changes. But it's a little bit of like, what? That happened? Are you sure that it wasn't because of this or wasn't because of that? And I don't think that means that we can't have reflective conversations or conversations where I need to be held accountable. I don't think that's what I'm saying. I'm saying when someone's sharing with you their pain or something, just sit with it. Be okay with the fact that they had this experience and that's how they perceived it even. And I think there's so much of the little things I experience. I'm living in a pretty homogenous community now. And for the last 12 years, I've lived in a pretty homogenous community. I am a rarity in the communities that I've lived for the past 13 years. There are situations that I run into on a regular basis. And so when I relay that conversation in a whatever way or in a frustrated way, to then have to deal with that happened, it's kind of like, all right, well, I guess we'll, and I think for a long time that really bothered me and it made me feel like, oh, I shouldn't be bothered by this. I need to be tougher. Why am I being so sensitive? But when I started like honoring the fact that this was real and this hurt and this doesn't feel good, I became a stronger person. So when we acknowledge and support people and we don't dismiss them, the flip side isn't that they become more sensitive and snowflakes. The flip side is that they stand in their power. That's what it looks like when we are with people through that. And that same practice can be applied to any kind of relationship. But I think race is a place in which we don't always provide that. And so that's something that I think is really meaningful, that has been meaningful, the friendships that I have had where people have showed up for me in that way. I've appreciated that.
And I think there's a lot to that, because it's not a zero-sum game. Fighting for equality, fighting for justice does nothing to my level of equality or my level of justice. It's something that we can all have. We can all have, and we need to allow people to experience that and share that. Last question for you, most serious one of the bunch. Not really. What's your favorite ice cream?
Man. Okay. I'm going to answer. I can't, I'm going to say three different things and you're going to just be okay with it.
Yeah, I will be.
I heard you mention on another interview, a la minute, and I own the strawberry balsamic.
That's good stuff.
Like, I'm all about that. But I gotta say, and this isn't ice cream, this is sorbet, but the mango sorbet, the Alfonso mango sorbet, do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't, but I love mango and I love sorbet.
Okay, but it's not just mango sorbet. You have to get the Alfonso, the Talenti, the clear. Okay.
Yeah, the jars.
The clear little things.
Sure.
That's the brand, Talenti, the Alfonso mango sorbet. You can't mess with you can't be going with the Haagen-Dazs mango sorbet. You can't do that nonsense. Yeah. You have to get the Alfonso mango sorbet.
We'll do that. And this episode of It's My Privilege is sponsored by Talent. No, none of this is sponsored. But Nelita, thank you so much for your time. I know you've got wonderful kids that you need to go see and say hi to David, but we really appreciate your voice. So thank you so much.